We have Dave Flemming joining us now on the River Islands guest line, voice of the San Francisco Giants for NBC Sports Bay Area and our 95.7 The Game Giants insider. Dave, good morning. Joe Spadoni, Sam Lubman filling in for Shasky today. And let's start the conversation here. It was announced from Buster Posey over the weekend that Tony Vitello is going to be coming back next year, by all accounts, barring some unforeseen thing if Tony steps down. But it's looking like Tony's going to be back next year. Just your thoughts overall on bringing him back. Is it appropriate to bring him back? Because I do have a lot of fans just right now in my DMs and sliding into them just saying, what does Tony do well for this squad right now? And what would you say to a fan asking why Tony is coming back next year, Dave?
Well, I think that's a little unfair. I mean, it's a fine question, but I don't think that, in the season that's gone the way that this season has gone, it's, you're sort of grasping for it with anybody. Like, well, I think Tony has been very open about the fact that this is new to him, that he is learning on the job, that he's learned a lot of stuff as it goes along. I think it's obvious that nobody is getting an A+ for their work this season. That's just not happening. That's not the way this season has gone. But I also think for the Giants, you can't, there has to be some continuity along the way. I appreciate the urgency to get this right. And I think, from Buster's perspective, from ownership perspective, the willingness to say, okay, this isn't right, we got to be better than this, is one that all fans should appreciate. Everybody should appreciate the fact that the Giants are determined to get this right. But there is a limit of how often you can just flip things and change and turn stuff over and have it be productive. And so I think, that part of the reason that, independent of wins and losses, I think you do have to decide on some stability, at least in the key roles. And so I'm happy that Tony's coming back. I don't think, again, there's nobody who's going to grade themselves on this year and say, gosh, I did an awesome job. Nobody. There's nobody down there who's thinking that right now, because obviously this season has gone sideways. But Tony has done a fine job. The players, I talk to players all the time. Players like Tony. Players think Tony is equipped to do the job. They feel bad that, in a way, their performance has made him look like he isn't, because I don't think they feel that way at all. So it's just so hard in a season like this to what am I going to say about what he's done well? Well, gosh, that one game, it just sounds so empty and hollow. I think you can point to some of the younger players who have made good strides and developments, Bryce Eldridge and Daniel Susac and Drew Gilbert when he's been playing more lately. And there are young players who have taken big steps forward. And in the midst of a losing season, I think the manager does get a little bit of credit for that, for helping create an environment where that development can still happen.
Dave, I remember back in spring training, and of course in spring training, hopes are always high. The vibes are always good in spring training, but there seemed to be a buzz in that clubhouse when you talk to guys. Guys were genuinely seemed excited to play for Tony this year. And it was a good vibe at that time. And at some point throughout the season, probably early on when they got off that awful start, that kind of went away. Going into next season, what do you think is kind of some of the lessons that Tony should take away from this season going into next season, so that that good feeling that they had in spring training is able to carry over more into the regular season than it was able to this season?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think you want to recreate that. I mean, I think the Giants, you're right about that. There was a really good vibe in spring training. There was a lot of optimism, and you want to recreate that. You don't want, it's not like you want to go to spring and let's be edgy and pissed off at each other and let's leave spring training feeling like we're no good. You don't want that. You want what happened. It just, the beginning of the season went so terribly, starting with that first week. The first week was just such a downer when the Yankees came in, and I think it took a lot of the juice out of all that feeling that had been built up. It sounds silly to say it's only 3 games over 162, but I think when you look back on it, that first weekend damaged this team quite a bit. damaged the confidence, maybe damaged. It'd be interesting for you guys to ask Tony. Maybe I'll ask him at some point about, as he looks back on it, whether the way those 3 games went changed in any way. I think the Giants, one thing that I would say, and it isn't a criticism of Tony so much as I think it just sort of reflects what happened, is the Giants got into chase mode, and they got into a mode of there was so much urgency early in the year to chase wins. And I think if you are doing this job where you play every day for 6 months, there has to be a longer term vision for how you use your roster. The Giants ended up early in the year not using their bench very much. They used their veterans so much that the bodies started to break down. And I think, if you're really asking me what maybe could be one of the takeaways from a first year as a big league manager and a first year as a pro manager, it might be that even if things aren't going well early, you're sort of obligated to stay in that long-term plan mode as a big league manager. And I think the Giants, and I'm not putting that all on Tony at all, and I think it's natural. We were all feeling that urgency. We were all feeling like, gosh, the Giants, they're losing ground. They got to get this going. Look at the division. You can't start this way. And April just went so poorly that I think they got into that chase mode. And I do think that was a factor in how this season went so sideways.
No, I agree with you. And again, you mentioned that Yankees series. And I just remember thinking back after that opening day, not the opening night, the opening day loss, when Tony kind of brought up, the fire and brimstone, and Robbie Ray kind of pushed back on that a little bit. I remember thinking in that moment, there's a little bit of an moment for me in that situation. But again, I talk about going into next year, but at the same time, there's a part of me that's like, well, what can you do in the present? And by that, I mean, what are something that maybe Tony could maybe start doing right now to kind of set a new tone in this last month that can carry over into next season? Like we talk about with players so often, where they can have a strong September and that can kind of give them some momentum going into next season. Is there kind of a similar situation we could see play out for Tony, where he can have a quote unquote strong September that gives him some momentum to build into next season, if that makes sense of what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think it's a fair question. Now, once the season gets to this point, and it's just a reality where when you're a veteran team with expectation and it goes the way that it's gone, there is going to be a loss of some of the edge that is there for most of the season. That's just natural. And, it's why you often see teams like, say, the Rockies, or, I'm trying to pick another team that kind of fits this bill this year. I think the Rockies fit it nicely, where you have so many young guys who are all trying to prove themselves, all playing. Those teams can have a tendency to have strong finishes, where teams that fall out of the playoff race and they don't have a bunch of players who are trying to prove themselves. I think that creates a different kind of dynamic. So makes it hard on a manager. The flip side of that is, maybe we're starting to see it. Jung-Hoo Lee took yesterday off, and Gilbert played against a left-hander, which isn't ideal based on the numbers. But I think, Tony's has decided that from now through the end of the year, the playing time is going to be distributed a little differently. And it's mostly because of, hey, let's just give opportunity to everybody at this point, sort of spread those at bats around, not be so matchup dependent when the wins and losses aren't maybe the number one thing anymore. It's hard to say. You never want to say that, but that's the point the Giants are at. So I think that is one thing that could happen from now till the end of the year. And I think, I still think, like I've said it to you guys all season, like with players, like the beauty of baseball, it can be painful when you got to get to the finish line in a season like this. But the beauty is you still have 35 games or whatever left. And that's 35 games for Gilbert, for Cox, for Eldridge, for Tugboat, for Wisenhunt, for Tidwell, for all these guys. Like, those are very valuable opportunities for those guys. And maybe you would say the same about the manager. Like, maybe just the fact of being around the group, getting to know everybody even more is valuable from here till the end of the year.
Talking with Dave Flemming here on the Morning Roast, Giants broadcaster, NBC Sports Bay Area, and R95 7 The Game Giants insider. And you mentioned the name Tugboat. There it is. Give it to me. Thank you. We're going to be playing that the rest of the year, Dave. But he's making his debut against the Cleveland Guardians tonight. And, he was involved in that trade for Patrick Bailey a couple months ago. Hard to believe. God, that was all the way back on May 9th. What should we expect as Giants fans with this guy? We know the nickname's fun, but who are we getting as a pitcher?
Yeah, I don't know what to expect in terms of workload. I'm not sure. There was some ambiguity yesterday in terms. The Giants know, they just weren't telling me yesterday. Like, is he going to be in there for an inning or two, or is he going to be in there as a true starting pitcher? His last time out, he did get up to 100 pitches. He told me. I asked him yesterday. So last time out in AAA, he built up to a full starter's workload. So I don't know what the plan specifically tonight is in terms of usage. Here's what you can expect from Matt. He is a different style pitcher for sure than almost everybody else in the big leagues. And that's his path to success. He's different. His path to success is not that he's got monster stuff. He doesn't. He throws 90 miles an hour. Like, he is way below average in terms of fastball velocity. And so, that's one of the main reasons why he hasn't been, because this dude has performed, man. The minor league numbers for him are just outstanding. And, the little different in the AAA PCL, which is the hardest place to pitch probably in the world. The ballparks there are just really hard to pitch in. So the numbers aren't quite as good from AAA, but his numbers over his first couple seasons with the Guardians have been awesome in the minor leagues. So how does he do it? He's got that long extension, short, low delivery. So in other words, the ball's coming out relatively closer to the ground as opposed to an above, an over the top delivery where the release point is high. His release point is much lower, but he's getting down the mound, like way down the mound. So he's got huge extension, which makes the fastball velocity play up. And he's got that vertical induced break where the spin of the ball, the hitter's brains just don't anticipate properly where that fastball is going to end up because of the way he releases it. And so the fastball, he uses the fastball a ton. It's his number one weapon, even though he only throws 90 miles an hour. It's a different look out there, but he has made it work, and he's on the attack. He throws strikes. We've seen how frustrating it is for the last few games and weeks and the whole year. Giants have not thrown enough strikes this year, not at all. And so that's what this dude does. He throws strikes. I can't wait to watch him pitch, but there is definitely going to be an adjustment for him. Success is not guaranteed when you're the style of pitcher that he is. So that every time out there for him is going to be eye-opening, I think.
Yeah, and so yeah, I'm very excited to see that too. And Spidone, we were having a back and forth yesterday about that 90-mile-an-hour fastball. He is, not as much of a believer in the 90-mile-an-hour fastball.
It scares me, Dave. It scares me.
As I am.
Today's starting pitchers, if you don't have stuff, it feels like you get forgotten pretty quickly. Is that a fair assessment? At least with the starters.
Sure. I mean, this is the age of velocity and stuff and size and power. That's how almost every team is going after it. But then, the guy last night for Cleveland, Foster Griffin, is throwing that 90-mile-an-hour cutter a million times and change-ups and flipping it in there. And, he's way below average fastball velocity himself, and he's 14-4. So there are different ways to do it. I think that one of the big questions with Matt is going to be, because like the guy last night, one way you can succeed without huge velocity is just having a wide, vast repertoire and having a ton of different pitches that move in different directions, being really unpredictable and being very fine with your command. When you have a tighter repertoire, you don't throw as many pitches and you don't throw hard. That's hard to pull off. And that's, it's probably the reason why he was available in a trade. With his minor league numbers, you're putting up a 1.5 in AA as a pitcher, you're probably not going to be moved, if you're throwing 95. So it's part of the reason why the Giants got him. It's a huge question about whether he can make it work, but he's always made it work. I mean, I don't know if you guys watched the telecast last night, but we threw up the highlights. I mean, I saw this kid pitch in the Little League World Series. I called his game.
That's so crazy.
In the Little League World Series. He struck out 16 kids in Williamsport.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
He looked exactly the way that he does now. He was he had the same release point, kind of the same mechanics, and he just threw the fastball up and nobody could touch it. And it was like an all-time memorable Little League World Series game. And I happened to be the one who called the game, and now here he is for the Giants. So that part of it's kind of cool for me.
It all comes full circle there. That is really cool. Talk about some of the other young pitchers on this team. We're seeing quite a few of them lately. Carson Whisenhunt last night, again, been kind of rough sailing for him. Blade Tidwell, there's good moments, there's not as good moments. We're also seeing Trent Harris get worked in as well. He's been out of the bullpen. I don't know if there's any plans to put him into the rotation, but just these three young pitchers here, what's something that you're liking that you're seeing from these three, and what's something that you're maybe needing to see improvement from these three?
Yeah, I thought last night, Harris last night was very encouraging, and that's a good example of, okay, his first outing did not go well. And if you play it back, you watch it, it's like, yeah, there were a couple bleeders, and then he left the game, and some of those runs scored after he wasn't in there. Like, it wasn't as bad as the final line, but he wasn't that precise. And then the game after that, the score's lopsided, and you come in and you're not throwing strikes consistently, and that's frustrating. And last night was just a different look. Like, he was on the attack, he was throwing strikes, he was mixing and matching. I mean, Trent Harris, the reason why you could consider him as a starter is, most relievers don't have that number of weapons that he has. So I thought last night was really encouraging, and that's, it's a good example of how with young players you have to give them some leeway to fail. You can't have a quick trigger that it's so hard to develop and win at the same time because of that. You hear that it's like an old cliche in baseball, but it's true. Like, you have to give these young guys room to make mistakes and learn from them. And so I thought last night was really encouraging for Trent Harris. The other two, look, Tidwell is changing as a pitcher, and that also is, proving to be a challenge. There's a learning curve in throwing more pitches, throwing a changeup that's different than it was, changing your pitch mix. And I think largely it's been really successful. I'm bullish on Blade Tidwell. He's got aptitude. The arm didn't bounce back. It didn't look to me like this last time out. He was throwing like 92. Like, that's not Tidwell. So you got to watch that.
The back issues too, I think, popped up.
Yeah. So, whether that was it or something else, you got to watch that a little bit. Whisenhunt's a little more, there's more urgency with Whisenhunt. Carson's had 3 years in AAA, and he's won the pitcher of the year 2 years in a row. And if he had stayed down there, he would have won it again this year. Like, there's nothing more for him to prove in AAA. He has passed that test. But now there's a lot of chances here where he hasn't pitched very well. And, last night was just not good enough. And so for Carson Whisenhunt, there's going to be some soul searching and some hard work to try to take advantage of this opportunity. He's going to get the ball again, but, it's got to be better than it has been so far.
Dave, let's talk about this last weekend here against the Rockies. This was it was a rough weekend at the ballpark. Do we have
to talk about it, Sam? Do we have to?
Friday night, was not a very clean game, to say the least. Tony afterwards has talked about how guys are thrown to the wrong base, on an evening where they had a meeting about throwing to the right base before the game. Saturday was a nice little throwback. It was a classic Logan Webb start where he got some run support. That was a lot of fun. And then Sunday, it was just a walk-a-palooza that broke out in the middle of that game. And the whole weekend culminates with Tony coming into the media room a little bit later because he had that team meeting. And Dave, we've talked about a lot on this show. Just, you've mentioned that Tony's been feeling these losses. And I've always noticed that in these post-game pressers, for the most part, he's able to kind of keep his emotions together. Like, he's never seen that angry after games, which is, I commend him for it. But you could see the frustration in his face on Sunday afternoon after he called that team meeting. It's just the fundamental mistakes, all the walks, all the kind of things that went wrong this weekend, culminating with this team meeting. Just how do you view just all the things that took place at Third and King over this last weekend?
Well, I mean, look, I think when you have some tenets, like when you as a franchise set the expectation level of here's the things we believe in and here's how we want to play, those, sometimes you hear coaches say I've heard coaches say those are our non-negotiables. Like, here are the things that you have to do if you want to put this uniform on and play here. And, for the Giants, really, since Buster took over, I would say those things are, we want to put the ball in play more than we were. That's one offensive tenet. And the Giants have overall done a pretty good job of that this year. We want to play much better defense, and the Giants have not done a good enough job of that at all. And to your point, this weekend was not good enough. And we want to throw strikes and be on the attack. And, the Giants have been a little different in terms of, now some of this is just who do you have on hand? They drafted a lot of power pitching there are a lot more power arms in the organization than there were 1 year ago, a lot more. So that whether that's intentional or not, that seems to be changing. But the Giants have been much more of a pitch to contact, less stuff pitching style. And if you do that, you cannot walk 10 guys. Like, you just, that is a non-negotiable. And so that's where I think the biggest frustration comes in. If you've got a young pitcher out there who's learning and he gets hit around and the pitch mix and sequencing isn't good enough, okay, it's a learning experience. If you got a hitter who is facing a tough lefty from the left side and hasn't seen that kind of stuff before and he strikes out, yeah, it's a learning experience. You gotta get in there and stick your face in and learn on the job. When it's missing your cutoff man, or not throwing to the right base, or walks after more walks, that becomes intolerable. And that's where, Tony, another thing we were talking about, what does Tony have to learn? Tony is going to have to learn. And I appreciate the fact that he did not come in here trying to be like everybody's ultimate boss. And he was respectful of his time in the professional game versus his players' time. But there have to be severe consequences ultimately. If you have some non-negotiables and your players aren't living up to those, there have to be consequences. Otherwise, it's just all talk.